I'm very excited to introduce tonight's presenter, Rabbi Adina Lewittes. Rabbi Lewittes is a thought leader, teacher, and founding rabbi of Sha'ar, a community opening new gates into Jewish life, exemplified by a commitment to inclusiveness, diversity, innovation, scholarship, excellence, and collaboration. She recently served as the scholar in residence at Congregation B'nai Jeshurun in New York City. She's also a member of the senior rabbinic faculty of the Shalom Hartman Institute and of the board of trustees of the Abraham Joshua Heschel School. Previously, she served as the assistant dean of the Rabbinical School of JTS and founded a synagogue in Englewood, New Jersey, modeling shared leadership and collective communal responsibility. Dini, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to learning with you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Good Yom Tov, everyone. Chag Sameach. So nice to be together. It's my practice to always open any opportunity to teach, to reflect with people with a short nigun, a short wordless melody. Science tells us that the world and that we are made of various vibrations. So that when we offer a nigun, when we offer a melody, it doesn't only settle our souls and clear our minds to receive wisdom, to receive Torah, but vibrationally it moves us beyond the smaller, sometimes cramped inner spaces of our lives, of our minds, into a wider alignment with the world around us. So I invite you to sing along with me as a way of preparing us for this time that we have together. So some people might say that the 12:30 slot is not the optimal slot, but I beg to differ. We have a tradition in Judaism that midnight is the hour when the heavens open to welcome prayers. The mystics teach us that this is the optimal moment to be deeply reflective. It's the perfect moment for contemplation as we prepare to receive once again the wisdom of Torah, the wisdom that provides us with guidance, with purpose, and with meaning to our lives. I want to just remind all of us of the intention for this time together, which is how as the world, well, not the world, but as we in the United States, though I'm coming to you from Canada tonight, which is a little bit behind us, but as we nonetheless make our way towards a new normal, it's tempting to leave behind the pain and the vulnerability of the last year and embrace, if not rush towards the freedom for which we've all yearned. But this moment, inspired by the Sinai narrative, is actually a moment that is worthy of a pause to consider everything that has been revealed to us during this year of profound personal and societal disruption, what's being revealed to us about ourselves, about our values, our goals, our responsibilities, and our opportunities. And as we move towards tikkun, or healing of self, of others, of society, and of the planet, this is a moment where it behooves us to ask, who do I wish to be in this next chapter of my life that I've been given the blessing to be able to write? To what is it that I am being called? And when we leave this revelatory moment, when we leave this Sinai moment, where is it that I will be heading? So with that in mind, I want to just open by helping us to see that those are not self-indulgent questions. Because unless we all emerge changed in some way from the last 14 months, we will remain as vulnerable as we realize we were before. So when we ask these questions, what did this pandemic mean to me? What have I learned? Who am I now as a result? It's part of the collective healing and the collective learning that our country and that our civilization needs in this time. There's a wonderful inspiration for this from the book of Ruth, which is traditionally read on the holiday of Shavuot. Most often the explanation for why we read it on this holiday is offered connected to the stories being a model of the Torah's accessibility to anyone in the world. Given in the wilderness in a place that is unowned by anyone, Ruth as a presumed convert, the linking of the book of Ruth to David, all of those are some of the more conventional explanations, but I think there's something deeper going on that touches what I said in my opening remarks, which is this. Tradition tells us that the book of Ruth was written by Samuel, and it is about the period of the judges. Why then is this story not included in the book of Judges? Why does it need a separate Sefer, a separate Megillah, a separate book? The 15th century Portuguese commentator Abarbanel tells us that in the book of Judges, those stories tell of events that related to the whole nation, whereas the book of Ruth tells a story that is about one individual in relationship to others, about one family. And so it's kept different, it's kept separate from the collection of stories that were really national in scope. But on a deeper level, consider what that teaching is inviting us to think about. I think what that teaching is inviting us to consider is the sacredness of personal narrative. The sacredness of personal narrative is a dimension of the larger communal narratives of which we are each a part. It's a message about the Torah of private loss and of private love and renewal that amplifies the larger national myths and animates the larger values of a people. There's this synergy between the individual and the collective as a source of moral and spiritual wisdom, authenticity, and authority that doesn't require one to always yield to the other, but actually enables each to learn from and to strengthen the other. So that personal narrative becomes a source of revelation, a source that has moral claim upon us. And it becomes one strand of the larger communal stories, not only of which we are also about and to which we are accountable, but those larger stories that are accountable to us as well. The pandemic for many, if not for all of us, has been life-changing, not only in the form of the losses that have been sustained, but also in the form of the new experiences of love, of friendship, of fellowship, of sustenance, of priorities, of aspirations, of vulnerabilities. No one can emerge unchanged. No one ought to emerge unchanged. And so as this normalcy around us begins to take shape, rather than jump right back in, let's take a few moments to understand and embrace what is being made clear to us as a result of the last 14 months and who we are as a result. This is part of the communal Torah that we'll carry forward with us. Remember, to me, one of the most pivotal lines of the whole Sinai story is Rav lechem shevet bahar hazeh. Okay, you've been here long enough. It's time to move on. The power of Sinai isn't actually what happened there in terms of the sacred exchange, this drama of revelation, but actually the power of Sinai is our capacity to take Sinai with us as we moved along on our journey, the journey that we're still on today. Just as the Torah repeats to us more than any other verse in the entire sacred text, to remember, even as we were living in freedom, even as we're standing at Sinai, remember that we were slaves in Egypt. We are bidden to remember, even as we return to the life that we have been yearning for, we are bidden to remember always what we contended with quarantines, with shortages, with ventilators, with isolation, and with suffering. Now, this gathering is called a tikkun. Tikkun means a repair. The name for this gathering of all-night study comes from a story of how on the night of the divine revelation, the people of Israel went to sleep, and in the morning, God appeared on the mountaintop ready to give the Torah, and nobody was there because we had all overslept. And so as a repair to that mistake, we stay up all night to make sure that we are awake, to make sure that we are ready. This tikkun is kind of a repair of that failure. In the same way, I offer this session as a tikkun, as an experience of repair or healing for the lack of attention that many of us may have offered to the signs and the wonders around us prior to the pandemic, about our own lives or about our place in the world, about the needs of our fellow human beings and of the planet. In some ways, it's an antidote to the personal slumber that we may have been in, and an awakening to a life of greater awareness and responsibility. This is where we bring tikkun ha'olam, the healing or repair of the world, into rhythm with tikkun halev, with the healing or the repair of our hearts. Both are necessary for each to be successful and for each to be effective. Now, I recognize that some of the questions that we are going to raise are deeply personal, and many of us are encountering each other here for the first time, where I'm honored to see, a rather large group. And so it's not going to be possible for everyone to share, but I do offer these questions in the spirit of the kind of intimacy that sometimes we're able to create, even with people that we have just met. Sometimes it's easier to think about things, to be provoked into deeper thought when we're surrounded by people that we don't know than when we're surrounded by people whom we do. And so I recognize that these are deeply intimate questions, and that each topic that I touch on can be its own whole series. And so our time together will focus more on surfacing these questions than on being able to fully unpack them. If there's an opportunity to discuss, to be interactive, perhaps we'll take it. But I recognize that perhaps the most important offering that I can present are the very questions themselves. And the other thing that I want to say before we dive in is that, yes, it feels like for many of us that the pandemic is ending. The CDC announcements about no longer needing masks for those who are vaccinated, with the rates of vaccinated people that are going up. But we have to remember that the pandemic, of course, is far, far from over when we look at it from a global perspective. And so I encourage us to embrace our freedom with a great sense of humility. And I dedicate our study here to the memories of those who have been lost. Dedicate our study in prayer for those who are still sick and battling the consequences of COVID. And the purpose in many ways of this reflective session is to make sure that none of the suffering in our world is to have been in vain, that we learn as much as we can from this time so that we can return as better versions of ourselves and to make better contributions to the world in support of its collective healing. In a volume called Reading Ruth, Vanessa Ox notes how so often in life, and consequently so often in literature, personal revelations occur in the midst of a journey, when we step away from the roles and the routines that we're accustomed to and find ourselves in a liminal space elsewhere, somehow where we're better able to see things about ourselves that we previously couldn't, or feel things deep inside ourselves that were previously not accessible to us. There are many short stories, she notes, that start with somebody driving or getting on a plane, going somewhere, prompting us to wonder, the reader, are they going to make it to where they're going? Are they going to reach their destination? What's going to happen to them along the way? Who is it that they're going to encounter? What is it that they're going to discover? And what is it that they're going to carry with them along their journey? What is it that they're going to leave behind? How are they going to be changed as a result of being in this process? In many ways, I think of her words as echoing also one of the deepest lessons of the Torah, which is that the main paradigm of Jewish life is Exodus, not Sinai, right? Sinai, you would think, for its dramatic revelation of Torah, you would think it would capture a greater share of the Torah's focus, that it would be more expansive, a part of the narrative. And yet it's not. It's the Exodus, it's the moving, it's the wandering, it's the journey, it's the departing from Sinai that's almost more important than what it is that happens there, because our physical journeys are metaphors for our inner journeys. And so again, back to the story of Ruth as the one of the strands of the holiday of Shavuot, Vanessa Ox asks in that book, why was it that Naomi waited so long after her son's death to tell her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to return to their families? Something transformed her as she made her way back to Beit Lechem. Some insight she gained that in that midst of that journey had her turn to them and say, Lechna shovna, return, go back. And so in the midst of this journey for us, this is what we have come to ask ourselves tonight. What are the questions that have become primary for us? What parts of our lives have become more clear? What insights do we carry forward? I want to look at 4 different areas and illustrate 4 different kinds of questions that I think are worth thinking about in this moment. And for that, I want to also lift up the teaching of Joanna Macy in her body of work called The Work That Reconnects, that's described in a book called Coming Back to Life. The 4 areas that I want to touch on are gratitude, compassion, mortality, and faith. Let's begin with gratitude. Just about every spiritual tradition lifts up the experience of gratitude for the simple fact of our being, for the gift of our lives, as the foundation for all meaningful, personal, authentic experience and work. Acknowledging that separate from our worries, our anxieties, our pain, that our life itself is an unearned gift. That gratitude becomes core to our being able to extract a sense of meaning for ourselves. And that gratitude, by the world's great spiritual traditions, is understood to be separate from the external conditions of our lives, even the external conditions of our world. That gratitude is not shaped by what we're able to necessarily achieve or master or control, but it comes from a deep, deep inner awareness of blessing, a deep inner awareness of resources that we contain. And so I invite you to think about, what have you discovered over the course of the last 14 months for which you feel more grateful than you may have realized before? What is it that you understand yourself to need and that you had access to in order to be able to endure challenge, maybe even to thrive in the midst of challenge? What might have been unavailable to you during this time? What strengths do you realize you carry with you that you can draw on? What have you realized you possess within you that you might have taken for granted before? And along with that, what attitudes might you wish to leave behind in this moment in the service of cultivating a deeper gratitude practice? When we feel anxious, when we feel vulnerable, gratitude becomes a stabilizing force. As Joanna Macy says, it brings us into presence. It brings us into presence. And our full presence just might be the best offering that we can make to the world right now, an offering of presence. It is for that reason each and every single day begins in the Jewish framework with two words, moda'ani, moda'ani. Thank you. There can be no more profound prayer, no more profound expression of our sense of purpose than expressing gratitude. I want to say a word about the second theme that I want to bring to you tonight, which is a theme of compassion. The theme of compassion, and invite us to think about any new revelations about our relationship to compassion that's emerged over the last year plus. The author China Galland says this: our choice is to be in love or to be in fear. But to choose to be in love means to have a mountain inside of you, means to have the heart of the world inside you, means that you will feel another suffering inside your own body and you will weep. You will have no protection from the world's pain because it will be your own. I think it's a beautiful, powerful teaching, particularly on the night when we are, mythically speaking at least, standing at the foot of Sinai. What does it mean to have a mountain inside of us? To have the heart of the world carried alongside our heart within us? To have no protection from the world's pain because it will be our own. I think this is the deep Torah that's behind this mitzvah, as I said, is repeated more than any other in the Torah, to love and to protect the stranger, because we know that pain. We know that suffering. Compassion actually is a word which means literally to suffer with. Compassion doesn't mean to have feelings for, or to acknowledge the experience of another. Compassion, the prefix connected to the word, literally means to suffer with another. In what ways have you felt more connected to the fate of the world around you over the course of the last 14 months? In what ways might you have felt disconnected from the pain of the world around you? In what ways have you felt true compassion? The story is told about Thich Nhat Hanh, who was asked by a group of students what the very best way is to save the world, to care for people around us. And Thich Nhat Hanh answered, what we need most to do is to hear within ourselves the sound of the earth crying. The best way to take care of the world around us is to be able to hear the cries of pain of those all around us, right? Before we can go out and become active, to become advocates, to literally take up the work of healing the world around us, there is an internal shift that has to take place, a clarifying of our powers of hearing and our powers of perception. And when that happens, when we truly feel compassion, the suffering with, when we find ourselves crying along with those whose tears are pouring out, when we find ourselves furious with those whose anger burns around us, that's what brings us to that point of compassion. And Joanna Macy again teaches us not to apologize for the tears that we shed or for the rage that we feel about what's happening in our world around us, because they're just the other face of our sense of belonging to the world around us. I think it's interesting to consider what it is that Sinai can teach us about this sense of connection to others with whom we share our lives and our society? What does Sinai as a setting have to teach us about compassion? So I want to share with you a wonderful, wonderful insight that I learned from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, about the difference between a contract and a covenant, right? Sinai represents for us a moment, not a contract that's created between the Jewish people and God, but a covenant. And what is the difference? A covenant, Rabbi Sachs explained, is a bond created between two people with a deep sense of respect for one another, a commitment to partner together based on loyalty and based on trust in order to achieve something that neither party could achieve on their own. It's not an exchange, it's a moral commitment. He says contracts are about interests, but covenants are about identity. Contracts benefit, covenants transform. Contracts are about me and you, but covenants are about us. It is the framework of a social contract that gives life to a political entity or to the market. Contract tends to focus on the creation and distribution of power, but covenants are different. Covenants are not about wealth and they're not about power. They're about belonging and they're about a sense of shared responsibility. Contracts create political relationships which are subject to competition, but covenants create relationships that are about service and about fellowship. A healthy society needs both. But covenants are also the bonds that unite people who are profoundly different from one another. As a society, we have been reeling from the conflicts that have strained our sense of unity, politically, racially, and of course, as a result of the pandemic. Our experience is that of people retreating away from each other, of an erosion of trust between one another. We seem to be living in a time where the differences between us are the defining features of our relationships. Between families, congregations, neighborhoods, companies, political parties, everyone is feeling the strain of deep ideological and philosophical divides. But Rabbi Sachs encourages us at this moment to think about relationships not as contracts that are broken, but as at their root about covenants between us all. Relationships in which none of us win or lose because what we seek can't be achieved by any single one of us. The framing what we are feeling when we really cultivate that sense of compassion I was talking about is covenantal language. It's finding something that we can only find together. Remember that the other side of compassion, of grieving along with the grief of others, is being able to rejoice in the joy of others. Feeling that sense that none of us can bring all the good to the world that the world needs means that we have to understand a sense of partnership that exists between us, and that it is not just okay to, but important that we take comfort in the good that others do as an expression of compassion as well. Feeling another person's pain and feeling another person's strength is what helps us build our own sense of adequacy, our own sense of resilience, and our own sense of value. So we've moved through gratitude and compassion. I'm going to say a word about mortality, and then a word about faith, and then I hope to be able to open up for some comments or contributions from you before we need to wrap up. Mortality and vulnerability. These are things that are so easy to acknowledge intellectually, but so easy to ignore emotionally and psychologically. Many are the authors whose works remind us that death is always but an arm's length away. including the ancient authors of our sacred texts. We have in the Talmud Rabbi Eliezer reminding us to repent one day before we die. And of course, his disciples say to him, how would anybody know when they're going to die to know when they should repent? And Rabbi Eliezer responds, exactly, repent every day, because we don't know which day could be our last. In a contemporary wonderful book by Rabbi Alan Liu of blessed memory called This Is Real and You Were Completely Unprepared. It's a book of preparation for the High Holy Days. I highly commend it. He offers this understanding of Rabbi Nachman's famous words, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. The whole world is a narrow bridge, and the essence is not to be afraid. He wrote, we spend our whole lives on this precarious bridge between what we perceive as the nothingness of our lives before we came into this world and the nothingness that lies beyond them, barely even realizing that we're on this bridge. And then we wake up and we see it and we're terrified. We ask ourselves, what am I doing with my life? I invite you to ask yourselves what it is that we have discovered over the last 14 months about our own sense of vulnerability. What have we discovered about the best ways that we cope when we're faced with vulnerability? Are we better able, in the wake of the pandemic, to acknowledge it, to embrace it, and to live in some kind of deeper relationship to it? How have we dealt with our tendency to be in denial about some of this? Does our shared sense of vulnerability bring us closer to others? Or did it somehow set us up into a relationship of friction with others? It feels like forever ago that we were muscling our ways into the aisles in our grocery stores, grabbing for toilet paper and sanitizer, right? The frenzy to get ourselves an appointment for a vaccine, the mistrust that was felt oftentimes between people on the street. Does vulnerability make us feel alone, or did it somehow make us feel in deeper solidarity? And on that note, I also want to give voice to the fact that it's not just our own sense of vulnerability that has unsettled us in so many ways, but also the vulnerability of our loved ones, the very mortality of our parents, our children, our friends, our colleagues, something that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but that we've had to over the last year. And finally, I'll say a word about faith and surface some questions about faith and belief. And then I look forward to opening up. And one of my favorite scenes in the Torah is when Moshe is sitting there and is encountering the divine and asks the $1 million question, Hareini nat kvadecha. Can you show me your face? Who are you? Who are you? What are you all about? It's this great line. I think it's only being cited as an anonymous quote, but you know those words, if I knew God, I would be God. There's this midrash that suggests there are 50 gates of wisdom that are there for each of us to access. And Moshe, the greatest of all prophets, was able to access 49 gates of wisdom, but the 50th gate eluded him. And the 50th gate was the gate of wisdom that offered insight into the question of why people suffer. Why? Why did the world become thrust into a pandemic, which today has infected more than 163 million people and taken almost 3.5 million lives all over the world from all different countries, cultures, faiths, so many have been wrestling with this question of why, if there is a God, why this plague has come to attack us in this way and in this time. We've all been subjected to the cacophony of media pundits, the noise about who was prepared, who wasn't prepared, the seriousness with which people took the warning signs, who bears responsibility. But underneath all of that, for many, even among those who are not, who don't identify themselves as religious or theologically inclined, many of us are straining to hear what message, if there is any, the universe is trying to tell us as a result of the last 14 months. Experience of suffering, of loss, of fear, of loneliness, of isolation, for many, they prompt a return to or a deepening of spiritual yearnings. But how it is that we reconcile these yearnings with a sense of despair over reconciling belief in a loving or embracing God who could allow for such global devastation becomes really, really problematic. On the eve of a holiday rooted in what some might call the most fantastical of religious stories, this meeting of God and Moses on the top of a mountain to reveal the Torah, here is, I think, one of the most important questions of all for us. What is it that the pandemic has revealed to us about our own faith, about our relationship to Jewish identity, to Jewish practice? In what ways have we found ourselves, our beliefs strengthened, weakened, changed? What beliefs do we emerge from the pandemic shedding? What beliefs do we find ourselves emerging from the pandemic strengthened by that were not part of our belief system earlier? Who are you as a Jew as you move back out into the world? And I'll just close this section with Rabbi Sacks's wise words when he said, faith is not certainty. Faith is not an expression of affirmation in a certain body of knowledge or set of ideas. Faith is exactly the opposite. Faith is the courage to live with uncertainty. Faith is the courage to live with the unknown. So I've raised questions that I think are really important for each of us to be asking right now about gratitude, about compassion, about mortality and vulnerability, and about faith. I invite you to share with each other, with me, what some of the other questions are that you have wrestled with, what some of the learnings are that you bring into this moment. If anyone would like to share, please unmute yourself and maybe just say a name, where you are.
Michael in New York, and I was just curious how you see technology, even including the Zoom we're using, I guess, relating to the questions you raised.
Thanks, Michael. Has technology revealed something for you about the life of relationship or connection that you've experienced in the last 14 months and that you hope to carry with you forward?
I would say yes, quite a bit. I mean, on the one hand, how important it is and how not having it as part of going to synagogue or whatever diminishes that. But then also how in some cases it can let you be in many places at the same time. So on a Shabbat, when as crazy as this may sound, if one service gets boring, you can tune into another.
What?
You don't have
Services can be boring?
to, go walk from one shul to the other. You can
Yep.
get there right away.
So would you say the technology has is a gift for which you're carrying a sense of gratitude for that comes out of the pandemic?
I'd say yes, and I mean both gratitude and sadness, as alluded to before.
Yeah.
So it's both. Not unlike the Jewish tradition, it's not. It's like at the wedding, you break the glass. So.
Yeah. If I could just offer another thought based on your question, and it's really interesting, and I think many of us are grappling right now with this, Michael, in terms of what our Jewish engagement is going to look like moving forward. There's been so much access created by technology, and a deep welcome that communities all over the world made to anyone and everyone who came looking for fellowship and inspiration. And as much as that sense of access and connection might be able to continue, as you said, I don't know if this is what you meant by it, but there's also some saying goodbye that many are contemplating right now. Right? There have been communities that people have found connection to that's proven very valuable over the course of the pandemic, but there is also now a return to a desire to be in personal presence with others, which requires a loosening of some of the ties that carried us through. And I say very openly and honestly, as the rabbi of a community, that I'm aware that there will be some goodbyes now. Some, understandable ending of relationships that might have been made possible by technology during this time, that for wonderful reasons now, blessed reasons, may not continue. And I just want to name the sort of bittersweetness of that you prompted with your question. So thank you. Darius, do you want to offer a thought?
Yeah, I'm Darius Sivan in Washington, D.C. area. I have been struck by the degree to which wishful thinking has repeatedly overcome science and wisdom, specifically in the resistance to public health measures, and also even on the part of government at all levels, removing restrictions at the barest sign of good news, and which has been repeatedly followed by another wave of the pandemic. And quite frankly, I'm afraid we're doing it again, because although we're in a good moment now, we have not yet achieved herd immunity, and the variants are probably going to get worse and multiply in places where there's less vaccination, and then come here.
Yeah, thank you for that very, very important reminder and perspective. I mentioned at the beginning that as much as we feel like we are emerging from with the permissiveness that we're being guided towards, it's certainly not the case all over the world, and your comment is also important in terms of what still lies ahead of us that we're unaware of right now. And so I want to echo a call for humility in walking out towards this freedom, and a call for awareness. And I think that's an even deeper reinforcement of how important it is to pause, as this session has invited us to think deeply about what we've learned, as well in the realm of public health, so that when we step out with a greater sense of responsibility and a greater sense of attunement to how we show up in the world, caring both for what it is we are seeking and what others need around us. I mentioned also, I don't know if you were on at that moment, Darius, but I'm coming to you tonight from the Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal, where I'm from, and where our family has a home. And I'm sitting here in quarantine, doubly vaccinated, in quarantine in my home, because Canada, though close by, is in a very different place. You know, catching up, but in a very different place. And it's been a humbling reminder. So thank you. Paul Litwack, do you want to offer a thought?
Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.
I'm not far from you. I'm in Toronto, just down the 401.
Hey.
And as you're talking about what's happening with COVID there across Canada and in Ontario, we're in lockdown again. So in again, out again.
Yeah.
But specifically related to an appreciation, a gratitude. When COVID came in, I was still saying Kaddish for my mom, and it shut down all the minyanim, and then suddenly the Zoom minions came up, and then the question is, can you say Kaddish in front of a Zoom minion or not? And just the struggle about what to do and how to do it. And I'm just kvelling because we Yids around the world have somehow figured out how to make it work. I mean, even when you consider whatever level you happen to be at, from Reconstructionists to ultra-Orthodox, it really doesn't matter. We're all in this together. And somehow we figured out a way. And as parts of the world are coming out of this and they're starting to gather, and in my minion here in Thornhill, it's actually quite interesting. The Zoom capabilities actually allowed us to connect and meet with some of our members and friends in ways that we weren't previously. So on that perspective, we're getting together more often than we were before, but there's still nothing that replaces being there in person. So virtual safe distance hugs to all of us, and let's just masliach through all of this. Be well, and there should be peace in Israel now.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Paul. You raised something that is so important to emphasize. We have seen an explosion of halachic creativity, a beautiful, magnificent, strengthening of our traditions' ability to adapt, to evolve, and to be responsive to the needs of our communities in relation to the world around us. This is something that is not a surprise to students of the tradition, who can see over the course of millennia the dynamism, the elasticity, the humaneness of our tradition. This particular time of the pandemic has allowed those energies to resurface in ways that have proven incredibly healing, and about which I share your deep pride. And I hope that the learning that has been able to carry us through, and the courage, the rabbinic and halachic courage that has carried us through, I hope that that will continue as the world opens up and as life continues to unfold, so that we know deep within us that we have the capacity to always remain relevant and resonant to ourselves and to the world around us, regardless of what it is with which we're challenged. There's some other hands that were raised. If you've raised your hand, I don't know the order in which they were raised, but please, David Barrett. Okay, Scott.
Hello, Hag Sameach. Thank you, Rabbi, for this discussion. I just want to give voice to Gaia and our living planets. And I'm in Belmont, California, so I'm 3 hours behind you guys. But I've felt for maybe a decade that some sense that we needed to stop. I never wanted to stop this way, but if there is a message, I just keep reimagining a different way to be in relationship with the natural world. And that this is a warning and a forebringer of things to come if we don't come into alignment. And I've been feeling and thinking that and trying to reimagine how I can be in the world and be in right relationship with the planet.
So important. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Sarah, and then Carol, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Hello, Rabbi Dini Chag Sameach. It's
Hi,
good to be
Sarah.
here.
Chag Sameach.
So as you know, I'm in DC, and I just wanted to put out there that I think, yeah, you know, it's incredibly important to be approach all of this with caution and with a sense of humility and excuse me, and you know, just trepidation. I think it's also really important to have some trust, I do anyway, in the people that are bringing us out of this, all of the science and all of the doctors and all. And I think that listening to them is also important. And I'm afraid that the more people who are saying no, 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 the less we're going to be able to be together. And so I just think I really I'm very much in awe and very grateful to all of our scientists and all of our doctors around the world who are working so hard to get us out of this. And I feel like we need to, have faith in them. And I just think it's important to listen.
Thank you, Sarah.
To them.
Thank you. I want to invite Carol to make a quick comment, and then I'm going to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that I've learned is solitude, to appreciate solitude, because despite all the wonderfulness of how I could be at so many places so quickly with Zoom, I zoomed out. And I think we are forgetting the times that we zoomed out too much. And I learned to appreciate the solitude. And there is something about the need to be with people and then balancing it, the awareness of need to be alone. There's one more quick thing I'd like to say. As grateful as I am to science, like everyone else, for us having the vaccines, and in relationship to listening, I think we need to listen to some of the people who are resisting the vaccine and listen to why they are, because there are people who trust their immune systems because of what they've been able to do with their bodies. And I'm not saying they shouldn't get vaccinated. I'm saying we need to listen to their concerns and not automatically say, you're wrong.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I'm sure there are many other questions and ideas that can be shared. We have to wrap up. I just want to offer this as a sort of closing charge. The main message that I wanted to convey tonight is the importance of considering whom it is that we have become or wish to become as a result of having reached this blessed moment of having survived the pandemic and being given the opportunity and the responsibility to renew and to repair and to rebuild life for ourselves and for others, to consider what it is that each of our unique roles can be or needs to be. Remember that we stood together, united at Sinai to receive the Torah, a set of social, moral, ritual instructions with which to build lives of dignity and of purpose. But the Torah was revealed, we're told, in 70 different languages, so each of us can hear and respond in our individual ways. That teaching is not just an accommodation to the reality of human and Jewish diversity. It's a reminder of our responsibility to deploy our unique individual insights and unique individual experiences in the service of healing the world. Martin Buber, inspired by our teaching of the Chosev Lublin, said, "It is the duty of every person in Israel to know and consider that they are unique in the world in their particular character, and that there has never been anyone like them in the world. For if there had been someone like them, there would be no need for them to be in the world." Every single person is a new thing in the world and is called upon to fulfill their particularity in this world. For when this is not done, this is the reason why the Mashiach, the Messiah, is delayed. This is the challenge, friends. In order to bring meaning to the reality that we have each reached this moment in life, that we have been spared, that we are now invited to discover what our purpose is, what our purpose as individuals, that we and only we can bring to the fact of our continued existence. We have to listen deep for the voice within, revealing to us what we have learned and what we and only we can carry forward. The world and its ultimate healing and redemption depends on it. I want to thank you so much for sharing this hour with me. I look forward to studying Torah with you again sometime, a time of restored peace and calm in Israel and around the world. Thank you, Chag Sameach, and Good Jantiv.
Thank you so much, Dini, for this session, for the opportunity to be reflective and to learn with you and all of the others who are here with us.